He then does find out. He kills the superior officer and refuses to tell the court what happened to lead to him doing that, because out of shame and embarrassment for her, that she wouldn't want that put out there. He ends up getting disowned, banished. Okay, that's Boba Fett's story. You've also got a childhood friend of Luke Skywalker who joins the Empire and works his way up the ranks of the Empire. He sees an Imperial guard trying to rape a prisoner in a cell, and he puts a stop to it and stops that person from doing that. We've seen this. Now, again, I don't expect everybody to have read these books. However, if you watch Return of the Jedi, you saw sexual assault too. Okay, and this scene has been getting brought up a lot, right? Princess Leia and Jabba the Hutt. And I don't even want to just talk about her in a slave outfit and her chained up and all of that. At the beginning, when this happens, when she gets discovered, he licks her. And not only that, he actually, when they turn away and C-3PO says, "Oh, I can't look at this," he kisses her like full on the face. And maybe you aren't familiar with the novelization for Return of the Jedi, right? But it's even more telling. I wish I had my book out of storage right now where I'd show you in the novel where it says it. But this is from the novelization of Return of the Jedi, published in 1983, by the way, right? With full approval from George Lucas. When Leia's captured by Jabba, instead of him saying, "I'm sure," when she says, "I have very powerful friends, Jabba," and Jabba's like, "I'm sure," he says, "I'm sure. But in the meantime, I shall thoroughly enjoy the pleasure of your company." Additionally, instead of simply licking his lips as seen in the movie, he's described as planting a beastly kiss squarely on the princess's lips. Now, they also go further into it, where the reason he has her change clothes is because, look, Jabba has a human fetish. That's what he does. The reason he had her change clothes is because he didn't like the sandy taste of what she was wearing. So he put her in the metal bikini so he can lick her skin. So the idea of someone being chained up, forced to wear a metal bikini, and then being licked by Jabba the Hutt for his own gratification, I don't know what to tell you. That is sexual assault. All right. So that has been the wild thing for me to witness. I think there's a lot of things you can talk about this show. I think the Mon Mothma sequences, I think so much of it is a hit or miss, and I think a lot of it is a miss, especially from what we saw in season 1. I'm not a big fan of the Cyril plot line at all. I think some of the spy stuff with Luthen is done actually very, very well. I do think that it drags a little for the general audience. But my main concern for those first 3 episodes would be how on the nose it was for the Imperials. Not there to detect rebel activity. The Imperials were here to essentially deport undocumented migrants and undocumented workers. That's how on the nose a lot of this shit was. And people aren't even talking about that. They're not even criticizing the fact. They're criticizing it for a rape scene, which was not a rape scene, right? In which someone tries to force himself on her. She pushes him off. They're all fully clothed, everything, like no type of groping, like whatever. He tries to hold her hand, I suppose, at one point. That's about as much touching went on. Pushes off, a fight scene ensues. It was a fight scene, not a rape scene. And it's just so weird because I get it. Not everyone's going to have read all the stuff I've read, but you have watched, right? You have watched Return of the Jedi. And this gets to a bigger point about Andor itself. I do think that Andor, season 1 of Andor, is one of the more competent things that Disney has made. I don't love the show or anything like that. I don't hate it like I hate some of the other shit that they've put out.
The controversy around Andor Season 2 is catching fire for one big reason. It puts something on screen that Star Wars had only ever implied. In Episode 3, there's an attempted sexual assault, the first ever depicted directly in the franchise's history. And it's not stylized or vague. It's raw, it's grounded, and it's got fans split. For some, this is the boldest and most honest Star Wars has ever been. For others, it's a hard line that never should have been crossed. At the center of the scene is Bix Caleen, a recurring character already traumatized from previous run-ins with the Empire. In hiding under a false identity, she's targeted by Lieutenant Krole, an Imperial officer who uses her undocumented status as leverage. He threatens to expose her unless she complies with his sexual demands. When she resists, he physically assaults her. It doesn't go further. She's saved, but it marks the first time Star Wars has depicted sexual violence so explicitly. Supporters of the scene argue that it fits the tone and direction Andor has established from the start. This is a series about systemic oppression under a fascist regime. Season 1 already tackled prison labor, torture, suicide, and police overreach. The brothel in the opening episode hinted early that this wasn't a Saturday morning cartoon. The new scene, they argue, is a continuation of that unflinching approach, not a shock-for-shock's sake moment, but a reflection of what real authoritarian abuse looks like. They also point to precedent. Jabba the Hutt's treatment of Leia in Return of the Jedi was sexually coercive, chaining her in a bikini, drooling over her, and murdering another enslaved dancer for resisting. The Clone Wars showed Padmé being forcibly kissed. The Queen's Shadow novel addressed an attempted assault against one of Padmé's handmaidens. Even the Return of the Jedi novelization, written with Lucasfilm's approval, includes Jabba forcing a grotesque kiss on Leia and calling her presence the pleasure of your company. What Andor does, they say, is remove the euphemism. It names the abuse, puts it in a real-world frame, and forces the audience to sit with it. Critics push back, arguing that Andor crosses a line. For many, Star Wars remains a family-oriented property. They see the attempted assault scene as jarringly out of step with the rest of the franchise, regardless of how serious the Empire's evil is meant to be. Commentators like Ryan Kinel claim this is more about pushing political agendas than telling a Star Wars story. They argue that there are other ways to depict tyranny without invoking sexual violence, a subject they feel is too heavy-handed and off-brand for this universe. Beyond the act itself, the immigration allegory baked into the scene has stirred debate. Bix is undocumented, and the Imperial officer uses that to exert control over her, threatening imprisonment and deportation unless she gives in. This isn't subtle. Andor explicitly mirrors real-world issues: immigration raids, profiling, government overreach. Tony Gilroy has acknowledged that the Empire in Andor reflects systemic authoritarianism, where every level of power is corrupted, from military raids to bureaucrats to sexual predators hiding behind uniforms. For some, this makes Andor the most politically relevant Star Wars ever created. For others, it feels like a departure from escapism into straight-up political commentary. And that's really what's fueling this fire. It's not just the content of the scene, it's what that scene says about what Star Wars is allowed to be. The reaction proves how fractured the fan base has become. Some want the fairy tale, others want the war story. Andor doesn't try to split the difference. It leans hard into the idea that rebellion comes from pain, not just heroic sacrifice, but the lived experience of trauma and injustice. There's also historical context from outside the screen. In the Legends continuity, a character named Yannick Sunber, a childhood friend of Luke Skywalker who joined the Empire, once stopped a fellow Imperial from raping a slave. He was punished for doing the right thing. That story was told in comics nearly 2 decades ago and is no longer canon, but it shows that this kind of subject matter has existed on the edges of Star Wars before. The difference now is that Andor put it front and center. There's no final answer yet. But the fact that this conversation is happening and sparking this level of backlash and analysis tells you how significant the moment is. For some, it's a necessary evolution of the franchise. For others, it's a warning sign that it's straying too far from its roots. What's clear is that Andor Season 2 didn't just push boundaries, it forced a reckoning with what Star Wars was, is, and might become.